Good evening and welcome to all. We are celebrating tonight the first year anniversary of our IFP School Voices webinars. So thank you for your loyalty and welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. As usual, our guest's presentation will be divided into two parts with two Q&A sessions. So please feel free to use the Q&A module to raise your questions and interact with each other and with my colleague Mei-Ling via the chat. I now turn the floor over to our Dean, Christine Travers, to introduce tonight's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine. Dear alumni, students and colleagues, welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us for this 11th IFP School Voices webinar. It's no longer necessary to present these webinars, which address subjects mainly related to ecological transition in our four main sectors: georesources, processes, economy and management, and sustainable mobility. And during which alumni talk to alumni, but not only. We are very happy to also welcome colleagues from the IFP EN group and from our industrial partners. The 10 previous webinars have all been very successful, thanks to you, dear alumni, who are our best ambassadors, and they have undoubtedly strengthened our network. This webinar is very promising too, and it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Mathieu Soulas. Mathieu began his career in Total Energies refining division after holding various positions in European refineries and as head of refining and petrochemical operation in the Benelux countries. He moved to the marketing and services branch in 2013 as executive vice president for the geographical zone of the Indian Ocean and vice president supplied and logistic, covering the whole Africa and Middle East perimeter. In 2017, he became vice president in charge of the lubricants business unit worldwide, covering the activities from industrial operations, supply chain, marketing to global sales. In August 2019, he joined the group's headquarters as Senior Vice President, Strategy and Climate. There, he contributed to elaborating and implementing an ambitious strategy on energy transition. He was appointed Vice President, Strategy and Supply of the Marketing and Services branch in September 2021. Mathieu Soulas holds an undergraduate degree from France École Polytechnique and is a graduate of IFP School, Refining, Engineering and Gas class of 1995. Mathieu will address the following topic: Total Energies, energy is reinventing itself, so are we. Mathieu, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. Very pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you. Quite bold, in fact, from the IFPEN to invite me as a speaker for Total Energies in the middle of two big events, I would say, for the energy world. First is a real crisis on the price of energy and supply of energy everywhere, and this energy being electricity, gas, crude, etc. You've seen the news and the level of the market. And the second big event, of course, is the COP26 happening this week in Glasgow. So it's a bit bold, but it's probably also the proof, and it's why I'm very happy to talk to you tonight. But Total Energy is part of this world in transition. And we have taken very serious commitments. We are changing ourselves. We are transforming in a world which is moving. And it's my goal to explain that to you tonight. So the first part will be mostly on the global strategy of Total Energy, and the second part I will try to do a zoom on the transformation of the transport energy mix, well, on transportation. So the first part is the big challenge that the world is facing today. We need more and more energy because the population is growing, because today 1 billion inhabitants do not have access to a clean and modern form of energy. But the world must switch to a less emission world. And we need to decarbonize, in particular, the energy mix that we are using. And third, a sort of third pillar, those two pillars must be accompanied with a sustainable approach. And that means also a just transition. You've probably listening to the big message of the COP26, one of the main challenges being how do we help the less developed countries to reach a modern energy mix. Of course, Total Energy as a big energy supplier is part of it. We are transforming ourselves. We have changed our name, which is probably the easiest, but we are doing much more than that. And in fact, we are what we want to do is really to become a major energy player in the energy transition. And we are really building a multi-energy company addressing or building our position on 7 different energies, which are listed on this slide. The two first one, oil and gas, are of course historical activities. On oil, we will focus to low-cost oil and low GHG emission developments. And on natural gas, I will speak about that later. We do believe that it's a very important energy in the transition. So we'll still develop those positions. But we are also investing now quite heavily on the 5 other energies that we are listing in our ambition. And we want really to grow our renewable businesses and switching to a really major scale. The challenge indeed is that we want to address the global growing energy needs. And for that, we need to work on very different pillars. The first one is about the oil production that we need to sustain because the demand of the world today is still there. But we need to prepare the peak oil for us being before 2030, and then the decrease of the market. The second pillar is about developing the key role of gas in the energy transition. Gas, because gas emits twice less CO2 than coal when used in power generation, but also gas because gas is the perfect complement, we think, to the renewables seasonality and intermittency. And the third pillar is to grow the renewable energies, and in particular the renewable electricity, that it was not in our historical activities, but we are growing quite fast, and I will show you. For I mean, those 3 pillars are really the business orientation. But of course, the driver is about the climate ambition. And the climate ambition, for us, it's the commitment that we have taken in May 2020 to go to a worldwide net zero ambition by 2050 and together with society. And because 2050 looks very, very far to us, and especially being a company full of engineers, usually we know how to calculate what will happen tomorrow, how to do a budget for next year, and how to develop a long-term plan, which is for us is 5 to 10 years maximum. So 2050 being very far from that, we have developed a very comprehensive and precise intermediate objective aiming at 2030. And for that, we have developed the 3 objectives which are on these slides. First one is that we want to be net zero on our operated activities, what we call scope 1 and 2 for those who are familiar to the subject, meaning scope 1 and 2 are the emissions that we need, which are linked to the operation of our own assets. So we'll be net zero by 2050, but we will have decreased emissions Scope 1 and 2 by 40% in 2030. And the second one, which is probably the main challenge, in fact, is to be net zero worldwide for the indirect emissions, what is called the Scope 3. And the Scope 3 is the emission generated by our customers, so not us, but our customers, when they are using the energy product that we are selling to them. And for that, we have said that in 2030, we will have decreased our Scope 3 compared with a reference year, which is also the year of the Paris Agreement 2015. And we will have decreased the carbon intensity of the energy product that we are selling by more than 20%. And the main challenge being the Scope 3 is really how do we decrease the emissions of our customers? And because it's in the energy industry and historical oil and gas industry, the Scope 3 is more or less 10 times the size of the Scope 1 and 2. So this is really the challenge. And it is for that for us, it's really necessary to develop and to provide our clients with solutions for their energy transition. Of course, it's first energy efficiency, so the less energy you consume, the better. But then it's promoting renewable forms of energy and favoring substitution, which is a big challenge usually, especially for industrial customers, to switch their installation to other sources of energy. And of course, the transport is in itself a big challenge with a very particular segment, with very particular solutions that we want to develop. I will continue on a few practical examples on some energy. The first one is about the oil. Oil is really, it's a turning point, I would say. We need a lot of investment still to require the demand. And we see today that when the supply is not there and that the demand has not disappeared, we are entering a form of crisis in terms of very increased prices. So the challenge for us is really to be able to supply the demand and acting on the demand so that the demand decreases in the future. For us, we need, we continue to invest. Our goal is not to increase our liquid production, but to stabilize it, and already to stabilize on oil production. As you know that most fields are decreasing by an average 4% production per year. It's already a significant challenge. But downstream, we need also to adapt to the demand, and being an important refining, having an important refining activity, we are already managing the erosion of some markets, and Europe being probably an important one. But this erosion will accelerate, especially with the Green Deal and with a new Fit for 55 package from the European Commission. So we are working to transform our refining industry, decrease its capacity, and transform its product toward less carbon intensive products. On the map, you see two green spots, two green, in fact, refineries that we have transformed from crude product, from crude refinery to bio refineries, being the site of La Mède close to Marseille and Grandpuits in the process close to Paris. And this is for us really the key, is that some liquids demand will remain, and the important is to decrease the carbon content of those liquids. And the easiest way is to increase, of course, low carbon liquid fuels. And for that, we are seizing some of the business opportunities which are existing already today, especially in Europe, and we want to develop it further. And not only in Europe, in fact, we are also active in Americas, and particularly in Brazil, which is very important to us. So we are aiming both at producing low carbon liquid fuels, but also, and of course, biojet and biodiesel are at the head of it. We have started the production in France in our first biorefinery in La Mède, but those share of biofuels will increase, still continue to increase on the road transportation. And then we're starting to invest in the pioneering synthetic fuels, which are hydrogen-based, and which is probably the next market which has to grow and develop in the mid to long term. The second form of energy after the liquids are the gases. And as already says, gas has a major role to play in the energy transition. We are already, in fact, a world-class player in the world of gas, and especially the world of LNG. We are the actor number 2 in terms of private company, number 3 if we take into account the Qatar Gas, which is a public company. But we will continue to grow with a target of reaching 50 million tons per year of LNG sales by 2025, which is a 30% increase versus today. You see on the map that we have really a global portfolio, a portfolio which is very integrated from equity production to shipping and regasification, reaching the markets. And like the liquid issue, the gas needs to be progressively decarbonized. And for that, we are selling low carbon gas. In Europe, we have made the acquisition of Fonroche to really grow quickly in a business unit producing biogas. We were already active in the US through a company called Clean Energy, which has already more than 500 service stations dedicated to trucks. And we are, as I said, investing in hydrogen. And in fact, we are more or less pioneering in the mass production of clean hydrogen, either blue or green hydrogen. The idea is also to work on developing the demand and the markets, which are not existing today, and especially the markets on mobility. We are part of a significant alliance called H2 Mobility in Germany, for example. And the third pillar in terms of business energy that I mentioned in the beginning is about renewable energy. We are growing very fast on the production of renewable electricity. We have already 10 gigawatts capacity, which have been reached this year. And we started only, in fact, significantly only 3-4 years ago. So it's a very fast increase. You see on the graph that we want to reach, and we have already in our portfolio, in fact, 35 gigawatts to be in operation by 2025. We want to grow up to 100 gigawatts by 2030, which should, for us, put us in the top 5 major producers of renewable electricity by 2030. And for that, we are accelerating with 3 competitive advantages. The first one is that we are building on a global footprint, which is very important for us, leveraging the businesses that we already have in more than 100 countries. The second pillar is on offshore wind, which is still at the frontier development when it's about floating offshore wind. And then we are also doing some very selective M&A. The renewable, this map is showing you that we have already existing assets almost everywhere, in every major countries having developed renewable electricity. It's demonstrating the first step of our global coverage, which is a true differentiator versus most of our competitors, which are usually based in a few countries. And finally, because all emissions cannot disappear or be eliminated, we are also investing in carbon sinks, which is probably a bit less known. We're investing, in fact, in both the technical sinks, which is carbon capture and storage. And you have a few examples on these slides, being in Norway, Northern Lights, in the Netherlands, or in UK. But we're also investing in nature-based projects with, as you see on the right part of the slide, very significant capacity in terms of storage. So I was probably right in time. I will stop here because I've been covering already quite a lot of subjects. And so part 2 will be focused on transport sector. And I think we have a few minutes for Q&A part 1.
Hello, Mathieu. Nice to see you this evening.
Hello, Olivier. no one else is knowing that we have shared the same banks on the IFP ENSPM at the time, a long time ago already.
Yes, a very long time ago. And we have even worked together at a certain moment in one of the refinery near Belgium. So I'm really happy tonight to ask you some questions of our attendee. The first one is, you discussed about the future of crude oil in downstream and upstream parts of Total Energy. And so you say that you will continue to invest, but if you will continue to invest, at which price of crude oil you will continue to invest on this sector, okay, on oil sector, and what is the impact of CO2 emission on this investment also?
Okay, that's a very good point. And it is a point which is very much, I mean, it's really a question that we have almost every day with our investors. You've probably heard of the question about stranded assets being on the top of the mind of the investors. In fact, we are, when we say that we are focusing our portfolio towards low-cost oil, is that we have put very clear criteria in terms of what kind of field we want to develop. And we have put, in fact, two criteria. One is on the cost of production. So we have a technical cost limit of $20 per barrel, meaning that we will make money even if the price decreases because the demand of oil product has decreased so much. So first target is technical price of $20 per barrel. And then the second target is a target in terms of emission. And for that, we have a target of 20 grams per barrel of production. So we both have the two criteria, economical criteria with the cost of production and an emission criteria per barrel. And we will only develop fields which are we have green light with those two criteria. Which should give a resilient portfolio.
Okay, we have also another question about the, you show us a map on the crude refining industry in Europe, and you show us different, let's say, plants you transform from crude oil to biorefining plants. Do you have other projects like that in future for Europe in industry, for European refining for Total Energy?
But not yet, because the last one that you mentioned is very new. It's the last one was announced a few months ago. It's in Grand Puy, close to Paris. The project will take some time because it's a very important project. It's transforming a refinery. La Mède costed us more than 300 million euro. Grand Puy is more complex in terms of project because we are developing four different types of activities on the site. So the CapEx will be around 500 million euro. Of course, it's very significant. It takes time, and the idea for us is, of course, to follow the demand. So it's Grand Puy will already give us some significant capacity. With La Mède, we were more focusing the diesel market. Grand Puy will help us to develop the sales in the aviation market. But okay, we'll see. The estimation on the long-term future is that the market will still decrease on long term. So we will still have to adapt. It will take some time.
Another question from Fouad on these topics. Concerning the liquid biofuel production, is Total Energy planning to diversify its project into production of raw materials, including conventional vegetable oils and waste oils for HVO, essentially, for example?
Yes, so indeed, with biofuel, there is a huge problematic, which is about having sustainable feedstocks. And you've probably heard about all the discussion that we had in France and then at the European level about palm oil, because there is a clear issue of using feedstocks which are not in competition with food. And this is very important. And we took some important measure to ban palm oil before any regulation in La Mède. So we are developing now most of our biofuel production based on waste. All kind of waste. Used cooking oil is of course one which everyone knows, but animal fats are another one. It's so lots of weights are used for feedstock, and we will continue to that before entering the second and third generation, which is using 2G. The generation 2G of biofuel is using, for example, waste of bio fibers, and then the emergence of the industry on other type of fuels which are not at the industrial level now, and which are more or less called e-fuels or H2 hydrogen-based fuels, the fuels of the future.
Thank you, Mathieu. We have a lot of questions about biogas. Do you think it's possible that for the French market, the consumption of gas for private market will be supplied only by biogas in the future? And if yes, when?
If yes, it's in long time, because the problem of biogas is a bit like the problem of biofuels, but even worse. It's that the feedstock is I mean, there's still a lot of feedstock to be developed, a lot of weights which are not valorized by transforming into biogas, methanation and biogas. But for the moment, no, in Europe, the potential is not sufficient to cover a very significant part of the gas. So the advantage is that it can be developed quickly because the technology is mature, but it will not. I mean, it will not enable us to reach a very high part of the gas decarbonation, and so we will have to switch to other type of gas. Hydrogen being the one which is the most mentioned currently, but we will need all type of I mean, low carbon fuels, being either liquids or gas. So biogas has really a share to take in the energy mix. We are investing in it, but we know that it will stay. It will remain limited in terms of percentage of the global energy mix.
Okay, other question on LNG and the LNG ambition of TotalEnergies. How, and the question is in concrete actions, okay, Mathieu? So in concrete actions, how TotalEnergies expect to reach their ambition in 2025, as you were shown on your presentation? And do you think it's an easy goal to reach for TotalEnergies? It's a question for our students, from our students.
So it's not an easy goal. Because I mean, we are already very big in terms of gas production, as I showed. I mentioned we are already number 2 behind Shell. Shell is the clear leader in terms of production and position in the LNG business, but we are not so far behind. Increasing our production by 30%, could be even more, is a big challenge. But we are quite comfortable for 2025 ambition, because we have already the fields in portfolio, but now needs to develop the big project and to put them in production. It's on some part of the world, it's technical challenge. We are already a significant actor in Russia, for example, in Siberia. In other parts of the world, it's a more political challenge. You've perhaps heard of Mozambique, where we have a huge project. I mean, full capex is around the $30 billion, and which is at the moment on hold because of the geopolitical situation. So no, it's not easy ambitions. It's each huge project. Each project has challenges in itself, but also external challenges, like I mentioned, being geopolitical or being the area or the environment. But it's we are quite confident that we can achieve those high targets.
And in fact, Mathieu, we have exactly the same type of question from hydrogen. So you develop a lot of different, and you give us a lot of key elements for the different energy developed by TotalEnergies. But you speak a little bit about hydrogen, and the question: what will be the first project for TotalEnergies to produce hydrogen in near future? So the same type of question, in fact.
What I forgot to mention on the natural gas issue is there is a question of price. And in fact, if we are investing a lot on gas, is that we believe that gas, which is a much lower carbon CO2 emission fuel than coal, for example, our target is that gas will replace coal. And for that, it must be competitive. And the markets, of course, are a lot of India and China. They are sitting on huge pile of coal. And the challenge is for us to help them switching to gas, which is less emitting. The hydrogen is the next generation. So for us, natural gas is it's a mature technology. The costs are already not very high. So there is a chance to succeed in replacing coal by natural gas. For the moment, hydrogen, we consider hydrogen as being the next generation of low carbon gas. But for the moment, the cost of hydrogen is much, much higher. We say between 6 and 10 times higher than natural gas. So before hydrogen being competitive to coal, we still have a long way. But like any new businesses, it's important to invest, to start the production, and then to start markets, aiming at markets which can pay in the beginning the high premium of the new type of fuel. So we are focusing mostly in Europe because we have a lot of incentives from the administration to start develop an industry which, when it will be at scale, will be able to reach an economy of scale and decrease its cost. So hydrogen, in fact, we have two projects which are more or less public in parallel. First, we are already producing hydrogen. We are a big refiner, and especially in Europe. And so we need a lot of hydrogen, and we are producing hydrogen in our refineries.
But what is the color of this hydrogen?
So today, the color is gray, because it's hydrogen produced out of methane, and it's SMR, and it emits a lot of CO2. Hydrogen production is 1 kilo hydrogen, more or less, makes between 9 and 10 kilos of CO2. So we have two projects in parallel. One is blue hydrogen, announcement for the Normandy area, so close to Paris, where we will invest with Air Liquide to switch the production of an SMR in a refinery in Le Havre towards low carbon hydrogen, so hydrogen, and we capture the CO2, and we will store the CO2 undersea in the Netherlands. And we have in parallel a more challenging project around La Mède, so close to Marseille, which will be a green hydrogen project, meaning that it will be produced with green power, green electricity, so solar farms producing electricity, and then an electrolyzer splitting the water into oxygen and hydrogen, and this will be the green hydrogen first production.
Okay, I stay on hydrogen. Just a short question. It's about the transport sector, and especially shipping and aviation sector. When can we say hydrogen fuel will replace the fossil one?
That's the big question. In fact, those two sectors have very specific challenges. Is that they do not have a lot of room to take fuel. And so that's everything is related to the density of the energy, and we have built all our societies and countries on a fuel which is very highly concentrated, which is oil product for all our transport. Hydrogen density, Olivier, you should give us the exact factor, but it's in terms of density, it's much lower, and that's a big challenge. So hydrogen plane or hydrogen shipping container or bulk or tanker around the world is not really relevant for long distance. So we need to find a way to concentrate the energy from the hydrogen. So there's different ways, and most of them are trying to switch to a liquid fuel. And the liquid fuel could be to combine hydrogen with carbon or CO2 and to make what we call e-fuels through different processes, Fischer-Tropsch being one of them, and those fuel could look like a bit the fuel that we are using today. But there are also other ways to transform hydrogen in other liquids, and methanol or ammoniac could be others. But what is important to remember is first, it costs already a lot to produce green hydrogen. And if we want then to convert this green hydrogen into either liquid fuel with carbon or ammoniac and methanol, you're adding another step in industrial transformation, which have also, in terms of yields, an important impact. So that's one part, is the cost, and how do you add up cost when you want to have a fuel which is more and more complex. The second thing which is important to have in mind is about the yield, is how much energy you put to make the fuel that you need at the wheel, for example, in a car or in a plane when you want to fly. And then the yields are very limited when you are switching in this type of value chain. Electricity is very high efficiency. Electric car, the yield is something like above 90% between what you put in the battery and what you have at the wheel. When you switch to a hydrogen car, the global yield is around 20%. And it's not our calculation, it's also public calculation done by ADEME. So there's both energy density, the yield, so how much energy you need to move your transport device, and of course the cost on top of it. So for aviation and marine, it will take some time.
Mathieu, two last questions for this first part about, of course, CO2. The first one from Gideon. What strategies is TotalEnergies taking regarding carbon pricing and the possibility, economical possibility, to making CCU unit?
Yeah, so two questions in one, but the two are connected. So carbon pricing, we do advocate to increase and to have a global price on CO2, because for us, it's the one driver which could drive the world, and the world is run with economics, to switching to lower emission, lower carbon intensive fuel. So it's very important that we have proper carbon pricing systems. On the geographical base must be wide, but also in terms of reaching a global footprint and all the energy. And then there are some issues. But of course, today it's important that we have a CO2 around 60 euro per ton in Europe. The problem is that if the cost of CO2 is zero elsewhere, which is the case today, we have an issue about delocalization of the emission. So price of CO2, we advocate a lot for it, but we also advocate to have proper system to protect some of the industries which are the most exposed to what we call carbon leakage. And you know probably already that in Europe, half of the emission of a European citizen are emitted out of Europe. So that's the case, especially in France. In France, we are emitting each of us on average 5 tons of CO2 per year. But if we take all the imported, the emission which have been made to produce the jeans and the shirts that you are wearing today, Olivier, you're doubling. So it's more or less 5 tons of CO2 emission imported. So very important to have high level of CO2 price, a protection in terms of geography if all countries are not playing the game. And this will help, of course, to develop industries like carbon capture and storage. Today, carbon capture and storage has no business case, except in some region in the US, where there is an incentive from the administration, which is not very, very significant. It's around the $50 per ton of CO2. But you have a valorization of the CO2 to do enhanced oil recovery. So some people are buying CO2 to help their production field. In Europe, where we are looking at it clearly, there's no business case at the moment, and all the projects which are flying with an amount of subsidies which is not sustainable in the long term, which are necessary to start this industry. But already today, our project in Norway, for example, the amount of subsidies is between 70 and 80%. So very, very significant. So two questions which are related. We need high CO2 price, but to launch CCS, we also need subsidies until the two will connect.
Okay, last question for this first part of the Q&A session. You will see it's linked also with CO2. It's, of course, we can try to limit CO2 emission, but the idea is, you know, that to have the target of CO2 limitation, you know that it exists some technology to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Okay?
Yeah.
Huh?
Direct air capture.
Exactly. What is the opinion of Total on that? And do you have some ideas and some project on that?
Yes. So today, direct air capture is, there are some plants existing, usually run by small companies, or some are backed by big ones. There is an issue of cost, which is in fact even higher than carbon capture when you capture the carbon just at the fumes outlet of a big industry. So for the moment, ourselves, we are not investing in direct air capture. We are looking at the price. So our estimation today is that you need a CO2 price of around $300 per ton, something like that, to make the business model of direct air capture flying. When you focus on high concentration CO2 flux, like on some industries, we mentioned the production of hydrogen, the gray hydrogen of today, but cement industry, steel industry have much higher concentration of CO2 in their fumes, which are in fact easier to capture and then to store. But even in those industry, where the flux are much more concentrated, it goes from 15–20% up to almost 90% when you focus on some specific flux in an hydrogen plant, for example. The cost of CCS is around $150 per ton today. So you see today there's still I mean, it's already a challenge today to develop CCS on industrial assets. To develop it on direct air capture, it's a step further. Okay, so the title is probably not the good one, but it's I will try to zoom on transport and covering a very different aspect of it. The first one is looking at the long term. And for me, that's the opportunity to introduce you the long-term view that we could build and which are called the long-term scenario. Within Total Energy, we are publishing what we call the Total Energy Outlook. The last version was published end of September and is available on our website. It's a long-term scenario. When we say long-term, it's until 2050. So it's more or less 30 years. How do we see the energy world evolving in the 30 coming years? So for 2050, in our TO, last version, we have two different scenarios, but you can see only the result in 2050 on the left part of the slide. The first scenario is momentum. So that's the second column. And momentum is based on all the announced and pledged targets of the different, all the countries in the world. So it's more or less what we call NDC. So what the countries have officially said that they will reach. And you see that it's already an energy mix in transport, total final consumption, which is changing significantly from what we have today. And the third column, which is the name is rupture, is showing the result of our second scenario. And for us, rupture is to be much more severe, and it's built to reach a target of temperature increase on the planet in 2100, and this is to be in line with the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement target was to be well below 2 degrees. So you see those three columns. We are showing the transport demand by energy on the left part of the slide. So you see in 2050, in rupture, the oil has decreased by more than 3, more or less, and we are the energy mix of the transport is a wide mix of many things, including natural gas, biogas, biofuels, electricity, and hydrogen-based fuel. And then on the right part of the slide, you see how we need to transform the subsegment of the transportation sector. The two first one for light vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles, we're showing the percentage of the vehicle which are run with either electric or fuel cells, so non-fossil fuels. And you see on the first line, light vehicle fleet. In the momentum, so in the pledge of the countries today, 65% of the fleet will be electrified or fuel cell by 2050. And in the rupture scenario, we are reaching 80% of the fleet in 2050. You see the figures slightly below for heavy-duty vehicles, because I mentioned already the challenge of the amount of energy that you can carry on a truck to drive long distance. And then we have the even more challenging subsegment, which are below for aviation and marine. It's the switch in Earth scenarios for aviation and marine are less electric, but are more concentration of the use of biofuels and hydrogen-based fuel. So both marine and aviation, and you see the percentage are significantly different between the two scenarios. Momentum, aviation momentum, we are reaching only 30% of the planes which will not be based on fossil fuel. And when we switch to rupture, so the aggressive scenario, I would say, we are reaching 60%. So that's to give you an idea of what a long-term scenario can show or give in terms of information, and what could be the interest of it. Because developing the scenario, the interest is trying to evaluate which type of business will change and in which timing. So if you're very interested, on our website, we have the slides describing those two scenarios published end of September. Those scenarios are also, for us, we are also using them to look at the geographical footprint or the difference between geographies. And this slide is showing you the zoom for Europe and China, showing the very big difference in terms of dynamic and geographies. And you see that the mature market of Europe will decrease very quickly. You see the two different blues are for diesel and gasoline, and you see the increase of biofuel in dark green, and then new energies in light greens. What is interesting is to see the drop of the final energy demand in Europe, and it is mostly because of gains in efficiency. You know that an ICE, internal combustion engine, has a yield, I would say, around the 30%, whereas an battery electric vehicle has a yield which is around something like 90%. So it's normal that when you switch from an ICE car to an EV, the quantity of final energy is decreasing because the car is more efficient. And you see a trend which is completely different on China, on the right part of the slide, where the fast growth of the fleet is still driving the demand for some years. And China globally expressed that they will reach a peak in 2030. You see on the graph that indeed the electrification of the park, of the fleet of light vehicle, for example, will in fact more than compensate the increase of the fleet around that year of 2030. So another point of view is about geographical differences. When I said that we are investing in 7 energies, we are doing it in different sectors, and of course, specifically, we are doing many things in decarbonizing the transport sector. On these slides, we are representing a key objective for 2025, so quite soon compared to now. And you see that on each of the subsegments of the transport sector, we are doing things at significant scale. I mentioned already the biofuel, which is the first example on the left part. We are targeting sales of between 7 and 8 million tons per year of biofuels It's the idea of using those fuels is that biofuels enables to keep the same vehicle, so you don't change the technology that you are using, but you can decrease by up to 60% your footprint in terms of CO2, and you keep the same vehicles. The second is on electricity, of the electric mobility. I will speak on that a bit later, but our goal is really to ease the customer journey with providing infrastructure everywhere he needs it. And it's why we are developing super fast chargers in some specific stations and hubs, which are aiming, in fact, to address the need for long distance, mid and long distance travel of electric vehicles. And we have a very large number of charge points that we want to develop and to operate. We want to be integrated on the chain before 2025. The idea is that an electric vehicle should find everywhere where it is a charger to feed the battery. In the middle, on the heavy duty, we're investing in natural gas for vehicle. We will have 400 service stations dedicated to gas or serving gas in 2025, with an increasing share of biomethane, because biomethane will be the means to decarbonize this natural gas. In marine, we are developing already significant position in LNG, bunker fuel. The LNG we know is not perfect because it is gas, so it is still emitting. But when you switch today a ship from normal fuel oil, so fuel out of a refinery, to LNG, you don't need much more storage volume for the fuel, and you decrease the emission by around 20%. So for us, it's a short-term good first step to reduce the emission. And normally, it's not the case today, but normally the price of LNG is very competitive compared to the price of fuels coming from crude. And finally, on the right part of the slide, I mentioned already, in Grandpuits, we will start the production of biojet. You know that today, most of the airplanes, if almost 100% of the airplanes are flying with fossil fuel out of crude oil, and we want to be at the forefront of developing the sustainable aviation fuel, of the SAF. We are investing quite a lot, you see, $1.5 billion in those, to address those segments of the transport sector, and it will reduce in 2025 the carbon footprint by something like 13 million tons of CO2 per year, which is quite big. And then I will zoom a bit specifically on electromobility, because electromobility is probably what you see, each of us, what we are seeing in the street, with some challenges. The first one is to show the challenges behind the scenes in terms of regulation. And you see on this map all the dates which are the ban on ICE vehicles, being gasoline or diesel or both. And those regulations are coming very fast and are coming from very different level. Of course, European level, there is a ICE ban proposal for 2035 in the package Fit for 55, sorry. But you see that also it's coming from the country level, it's coming from some regions, some cities. And this map is dedicated to light vehicles, but on heavy duty vehicles, we will have probably the same constraint, just following by a few years. The other challenge that we collectively need to address is the very different type of business model that the electromobility is providing. So, and in fact, for us, it's a really completely different business model, because we are switching from the business model of today, which is a very small red part on the left part of the slide. So almost exclusive supply from service stations. When you want fuel for your car, your truck, or your bus, you have to go to a service station or to a private service station, which is more or less the same. And then going to the left, you see the very different types, which is what we call multi-canal energy distribution system, that we need to put in place with a mix of private charging, so either at home or at depot. So for buses or for trucks, it's what we call charging at depot. So it's private charging, private ground, or public charging, so open to any kind of visitors, where you see charging at work, what we call slow public charging, which is more or less when you're parking in overnight, for example, and when you are traveling long distance, the fast public charging. And you see the very wide split of the energy mix. So that's the round figures in white round in the bottom of the slide. And that's our estimation, but half of the electricity will be delivered at home, but the balance, the other 50%, will be spread on very different types of charging installation. And after doing this evaluation, we decided as an energy provider that we wanted to follow our customers on their consumption journey. And so we are investing heavily in the different segments of this distribution new system, with the ambition to become a major actor in electromobility. And it's one of the challenges, of course, it's like every new business, you start to invest, and it's big capex, because building a high power charge point is quite expensive. And you do not have always the needed power, and with its high power charge, you need a lot of power. So you need to invest heavily in infrastructure, coming from high voltage to low voltage, and you need to invest in many different places. So you see on the left part of the slides, our ambition is to grow. We had already, end of last year, more than 20,000 charge points operated. We have the ambition to multiply this figure by 7 before 2025, so reaching 150,000 charge points operated. And you see how they will more or less split on the right part of the slide. So we will build, or we are building already, fast charge points, being on the main road corridors or being in urban area for intensive users. And so that's more or less 500 sites before 2025. And we are also investing in major city. You perhaps know that we are operating the concession already in Amsterdam, Brussels, London, and Paris. We purchased an actor in Singapore, and we gained very recently the concession of Antwerp in Belgium. And we are also working with, in fact, B2B. Usually it's current customers that we are helping to switch to electromobility. So it's installing charge points at the place, at their place, their plant, their factory, or their headquarters. We are also investing, in fact, upstream. I didn't put that in the slides, to ease the journey of switching from ICE to BEVs, to electric vehicles, battery electric vehicle. We are upstream of the value chain. We are investing heavily in battery manufacturing. You've probably heard of the Airbus of the battery, launched by France and Germany. And in fact, we are investing 1/3 with Stellantis, 1/3 with Daimler, and the rest being TotalEnergies. With affiliate Saft, which is quite a specialist in terms of battery technologies. And finally, because I will be, if not too long, the conclusion is more or less that we need to transform the energy demand in the world where we are living. And this change is a very deep change, because we need to change the infrastructures. We need to change the equipments which are consuming energy. And of course, for that, and above all of that, probably, we need to change the behaviors as customers. We need to change our behaviors, but as the other companies, etc., we need to change the way we're consuming energy. So it's why I finished with this slide, showing that we cannot do it alone as an energy provider, and especially in the beginning of those businesses, where the business models are still not very exciting and not very profitable. You still have lots of dApps and you still need to invest a lot. So it's quite difficult to go on. So it's why we are working a lot in partnerships and in partnership, especially with our customer. You see on this slide some example of what we are doing. For example, promoting and developing LNG bunkering places in Marseille, for example, or in Rotterdam with a customer CMA CGM. Very recently, we have started to develop significant volume of biojet, and we've done that with Air France in Europe. We are also investing on for logistic actors like Right Food. The example is Right Food in Nigeria, where we are providing the electricity with solar power plant on the site of the customer, and then he can electrify its mobility in a country where the power supply is not reliable at all. We are helping the customer to be almost carbon free. And then you see on the long distance or the heavy duty or road transport, it's the three sides. We are working a lot in both electricity. So I mentioned already the B2G, so the cities we are working with, like the one in Rotterdam. We are developing partnerships with Hyzon, which is a truck manufacturer, which will almost is specialized almost only on hydrogen trucks for long distance. And then we are also developing the gas for long distance transport, for example, with Vivago in the Netherlands. And I think we still have some questions to address.
Yes, a lot of subjects, so a lot of questions. But okay, we will try to answer quite quickly to the different questions. First set of questions about the scenario you have presented. The first one, do you see an acceleration in transition in terms of this scenario, what you expect in the future, but do you see an acceleration in transition after the COVID crisis? And a double question again, you know I'm a specialist on that, and what could accelerate the rupture scenario?
So first one is in fact no. We do see acceleration in some countries, and in fact mostly in Europe, where you see clearly that the policies which have put in place to accelerate the transition toward electric mobility for light vehicle is really gaining pace. And today we have reached in Europe 20% of the new cars which are either BEV or plug-in hybrid. So it's 20% of the new cars is already quite a lot, significant. But on a worldwide basis, the things have not changed drastically in 2 years. And for us, it's not a surprise. I know it's probably the main critics that we are receiving is that we do not change things quickly enough. The problem is that the world of energy is a world which needs times and a lot of investments to change. And it will not be overnight. At least we are not Harry Potters, so we cannot do it with just, but it's doable. So no, COVID crisis has changed the mindsets. And in many places, we see that the mindset having changed, and it started probably earlier in 2019 with a big movement by the youth, etc. So it's the mindset, the momentum is changing, and it's very good because it's what we need to change drastically. But in any case, it will take time. And then what needs to switch from momentum to rupture? The first need is to switch from business as usual to momentum, and that we need a lot of things. Of course, we need regulation, and we need the states who have countries who have pledged a lot of things to put them in place. And then we need a lot of change in the energy providers. It's what we are trying to do by investing in the development of a new energy. You need to see the change in the customers, and you need to help them to change. And so first step is to be able to reach momentum. And then the next time, I mean, between momentum and rupture, when we have built those two scenarios, the main difference is that all countries in rupture should follow the same path that countries like Europe or the US. So it's it's in fact the underdeveloped or less developed countries which need to be helped to go the same path and the same speed in terms of transition than the most developed countries. So the challenge is there, and it's something which is very well discussed at the COP26, is how do, between brackets, the rich countries can help the less developed countries to move into this energy transition.
Another question about scenario. I think you have answered a little bit, but just to precise, could you explain the difference between the two scenarios you present, estimating the future fuel market in 2050?
In terms of fuel markets, you mentioned hydrocarbon, crude oil-based fuel, or
yes,
it's
yes, I think so.
So for us, so today the crude oil market is around 100 million barrels of oil per day. Is easy to remember. In 2050, in a rupture scenario, we are around 40 million barrels per day. So it's a big decrease. And momentum, I don't remember the figure exactly, but it's around 65 million barrels per day. So it's already a sharp decrease, but okay, the step must be. So we still have crude oil in 2050. Of course, much less than today, which is good in terms of emission. We are in 2050. In fact, the first big change is that there is no more coal, or almost no more coal, and coal being the most intensive in terms of CO2 emission. We reduced drastically the crude oil, and then the gas decreased, but in much lower percentage. And all that is compensated, and all the growth in terms of energy demand is compensated by low or zero carbon energy, like solar and wind, for example.
Another question on the scenario, how the relocation of activity is taken into account within this scenario?
That's, in fact, that's a good point. Because there are some limits in the new energy, in the renewable energy, it's a challenge because some countries do not have the potential to put in place lots of windmills or lots of solar panels because the weather is just not proper and their potential is not. So indeed, we need to think about installing significant infrastructure to link or to make new flux for those type of product and type of fuels or energy. In our scenario, we have taken that into account, especially for hydrogen, because all the growth in terms of hydrogen or hydrogen-based fuel, it was a bit quick, but if you want to see more quantity, you look at the slide on our website, but it's huge volume of hydrogen that we need, and it needs to be green and blue hydrogen. So we have developed a specific model for the hydrogen, which is in fact based on long distance transport. For us, the green hydrogen will be produced in some specific area in the world, which have a lot of potential in terms of both wind and solar. And then the hydrogen will be either transported by pipe, like in terms of gas, or it will be transformed into liquid fuel, what I mentioned, methanol, ammonia, and e-fuels could be a possibility. So indeed, we have taken some of the logistic constraints and the potential of low carbon fuel. But it's and that's a good aspect. It's what is the macro in terms of macroeconomy? What is the impact for every country? And that's a very good question. So from some countries like Europe, where we are relying a lot, except Norway and UK, from importing expensive energy like crude oil or gas, there could be a positive impact in terms of GDP. And some countries, of course, the impact will be negative. And so it's very important economical aspect on looking at the countries and the impact on GDP of this energy mix switch.
Another question on the two scenarios. So if we well understood, the rupture scenario is linked with the 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature, atmospheric temperature, and what is the level for the momentum scenario? Is 2 degrees or?
No, rupture is well below 2 degrees, which is the Paris Agreement. So it's not a 1.5 scenario, which must be even more drastic. And we don't think, in fact, that it's very realistic.
Okay.
The momentum is above 2 degrees temperature increase, so it's probably not acceptable to keep correct way of living in most of the part of the planet. So it's I think 2.3 or 2.4.
Another question, you know that we have a lot of students follow this webinar, and we have a lot of questions about skills and new skills because you are changing of, let's say, of the way to produce energy. So what about the new jobs? And even some precise question, do you say that you convert some refining to biorefining? Do we have jobs for us?
So the answer is yes, we have a lot of jobs. But so for the young ones, it's first for the one who loves crude oil and who are still in dream to drill and produce. There's still a future. I said there's still a crude oil at the long term, but more important, and it's valuable, of course, for the young one, but also for the elder one. I mean, some of our new industries are based on skills that we have already today. And it's why we have recently reorganized all the technical position of the group Total, so just before switching to Total Energies. And we have put together all the technical people instead of having them in upstream, midstream, downstream, etc. Because we see a lot of synergies between the competencies. So of course, we will need more and more people specialized on or being knowing the world of power, because renewable, because more electrification everywhere. But we also need drilling competencies or upstream competencies for the capture of and the storage of CCS, for example, because CCS is more or less the same competencies than a refining guy for capture, and then an upstream EP guy of today to store the CO2. We have also put together people specialized on floating installation, so that we have when we develop a platform or when we develop an FPSO somewhere in the world, we have the floating competencies which are used today to develop the windmills floating offshore, and which are not exactly the same type of equipment, but still it's floating, it's in the middle of the sea, usually very far from the coast, and with the same challenge that what we have developed in the North Sea, for example, for a platform to have a windmill in the same place needs sometimes the same competencies.
And I have a last question. I have a lot of questions, but a last for you, Mathieu, because the time is
and all the others are for you.
Yes, the other are for me. No. A last one about electrical vehicle. How do you see the retail network evolve with only 5% of electrical vehicle charge power? Does that mean that the model will fastly evolve to reduce the number of stations? Is it clear, this question for you?
Yes, it's a big question is about what the network of service station, what will happen. And it's a very good question.
So it's a question from Angélique, Mathieu.
So on long distance, we will still need service station. Because when you're traveling from, I don't know, from Paris to Lyon, usually you need to stop. And today, in fact, you don't need to stop because of the diesel in your car or the gasoline in your car, but you need to stop because after 2 hours of driving, you need to stop. So, and it's something which is quite interesting, and is that today when we are designing the high power charge points on highway service station, we are not designing them because of the fuel or the electricity. We are designing them because the people need to stop and rest and food. So they need food and they need bathrooms and they need. I mean, the service station on the way is very important. Of course, on other places, like in the urban places, we will need to reconfigure some of the service stations. And it's why, in fact, what is also interesting is that service stations today have changed a lot in terms of their return. And a lot of places where with less and less convenience stores in the small countries, on the village, etc., for example, we have taken this role with our service station. And we have a clear goal to increase the percentage of return that we are making in our service station with other activities than fuel. Because an electric car, you still need to wash your car, because you still need to stop sometimes and take coffee, because when you go out late, you still need to find a shop open. And if you need one, perhaps the existing service station can continue to have a sustainable existence in that domain. So we are developing the convenience store and what we call the SFS of shop, food and services, which are the non-fuel activities of service station. And of course, there's a lot of other things possible with a convenience store, and but it's of course an important question. And if you ask me how many service stations will still exist in the future, my answer is that we will still have quite a lot, but probably a bit less than what we have today.
Thank you, Mathieu, for all these precise answers to all these questions, and thank you for all your questions. Thank you for your answer, Mathieu.
Thank you very much.
And I think Sabine, okay,
yes, it's my turn. Thank you. So thank you very much, Mr. Soulas, for your presentation and the accuracy of your answers. As agreed, your presentation as well as the video of this webinar will be shared with all the participants. And thank you also, Olivier, for your talents as an animator, and thank you all for your participation. So I now give the floor to our Dean, Christine, for the conclusion.
So very, very short conclusion. So Mathieu, thank you very much for this really very interesting talk, and for your answers to all these questions. Thank you to all for all these questions too. And I have to announce the next IFP School Voices webinar. It will take place on December 9. And we will be pleased to welcome Nicolas Gelin, Senior Group Expert, Future Fuels Environment, Low Carbon Fuels, Prospective Manager at Safran. Is a student from PPM class 1999. And the topic titled by Nicolas will be Aviation Carbon Neutrality Roadmap, Realistic Ambitions. I hope to see you for this next webinar. Thank you, and have a nice evening.